Welcome back to Historical Figures Explained, and oh man, do we have a controversial one today. We are of course gonna be talking about Christopher Columbus. He was born in 1451 in Genoa, modern-day Italy. There is a lot what remains unknown about his life. Even this picture you are currently looking at most likely doesn't correlate with Columbus's actual appearance, as it was painted by Sebastiano del Piombo in 1519 when Columbus was already dead. What we know for certain though is that young Christopher, approximately at age 10, fell in love with the sea, which he most likely got from his father. Ever since then he was destined to become a great seaman. Approximately at age 14, for the first time he went to the sea and started his career as a sailor. For the next 6 years he worked on multiple ships as a sailor and a merchant. There is a legend which says that Columbus was also associated with piracy, although we can't confirm or deny these claims. Anyhow, Christopher Columbus gained a ton of experience on the sea in the Mediterranean, but he also sailed to modern-day Ireland and possibly also Iceland. During this time he also married Philippa Moniz, with whom he had a son, Diego. Now let's talk about why Columbus became so famous, and that was due to exploration. Exploration started because the Europeans had to find a different way to Asia, mainly India, which was an important trade partner. Trade routes to Asia had not been a problem before the 15th century, but the fall of Constantinople in 1453 severely complicated things. The Ottomans were not the friendliest of people to the European Christian merchants, let's put it that way. There were attempts to reach India sailing around Africa, which were later successful, but it took a long time to get there this way. Columbus, along with some other geographers and astronomers, thought that it was possible to reach Asia sailing west. He was able to convince people that it indeed was possible, even though his calculations about the distance were completely off. Nevertheless, Columbus began to look for funding for this journey. First, he tried to convince the King of Portugal, John II, but he was unsuccessful, due to Bartolomeu Diaz, who had found a way to India along the African coastline, and he was already working for the Portuguese crown. Columbus then tried his luck with the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. He managed to impress Queen Isabella, so his request was submitted to the experts who had to approve it. It took 5 years to approve the voyage, because Spain was a bit too busy with Reconquista at that time. But in the end, Columbus was granted the support of the Spanish crown. Columbus also requested the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea if successful, and he would also become the governor of the newly discovered land, if there were any. Plus, he would be entitled to 10% of the annual profits from the new colonies. 3rd of August 1492, Columbus embarked on his first voyage to the new lands. He was given 3 ships, Nina, Pinta and the flagship Santa Maria, which was arguably the worst ship of the 3, because it lacked maneuverability. They sailed for 5 weeks, which was way longer than what had been expected. The morale of the crew was so low that Columbus agreed that if they don't spot land within the next 3 or 4 days, they would return to Spain. Luckily, a man named Rodrigo spotted land a few days later. There was a huge bounty promised by the Spanish crown to the person who spotted land first. So, of course, Columbus claimed that he had seen land a few hours prior to that, and he gave himself the award. Poor Rodrigo. Anyhow, they landed on an island which they called San Salvador, and for the first time made contact with the indigenous people of the Americas. And because Columbus thought he landed in India, the inhabitants were named Indians. He noted that they could be converted to Christianity and that they excel at repeating stuff they are told. I'm sure nobody's gonna exploit that later on, right? The fact that their leaders had gold and jewelry also didn't help them very much. Columbus navigated the seas of the Caribbean for some time after that. During this, his flagship, Santa Maria, had to be abandoned because it got wrecked. Columbus ordered 39 of his men to build a small fort out of the ship and garrison the area, because there was not enough place on the 2 remaining ships to carry them back to Spain. The way back to Spain was quite a challenge. The 2 ships got stuck in a storm, so they landed in Portugal, not in Spain. They managed to find their way to the monarchs eventually. Columbus impressed them with his stories about vast amounts of gold in the newly discovered areas. He also brought back a few of the Indians who were supposed to learn Spanish to be able to communicate with their tribes back in the Caribbean. All of this made Columbus very famous, so he was granted funding for his second voyage. This time he was given a fleet of 17 ships carrying also soldiers, priests and potential colonizers. When they made their way back to their little fort made out of the remains of Santa Maria, they found all 39 men dead. This was the beginning of the terror against the indigenous people of the Americas. They were forced to bring the Spaniards gold, and if they didn't meet the quotas, their limbs were cut off, the women were being raped daily, and many people were taken back to Spain as slaves. even though most of them didn't survive the journey. This voyage was not as successful as the first one, since Columbus was not able to gather as much gold as he promised. So he returned just with the people. Luckily for him, not for them though, he was able to sell them into slavery, and the money he made from this was used to fund his third voyage. This time, 6 ships made their way across the ocean. 3 of them were used to supply Hispaniola, which became a center of the new colony, and the other 3 were used by Columbus for further exploration. It was during this voyage when Columbus managed to land on the continent of South America, making him the first European to manage to do so. His problems probably outweighed his success though. His health deteriorated, and when he returned to Hispaniola, people were unsatisfied with him and his son as the rulers. Spain sent Francisco de Bobadilla to sort this out. Columbus was imprisoned due to his gruesome actions against the natives and brought back to Spain. He didn't stay in prison for long, as he was seen as a hero by the Spanish citizens. He was also granted one more voyage, his fourth and ultimately also the last one. But he was forbidden from entering Hispaniola. This voyage didn't go very well, as he got stuck on Jamaica and his ship was heavily damaged because of the storms. He had to be rescued by the Spaniards, who had to send a ship all the way from Spain to save him and his crew. The inhabitants of Hispaniola refused to help, because they hated Columbus so much. This meant that he was stuck in Jamaica for more than a year. He returned to Spain as a very wealthy man and an accomplished explorer. Although it remains unknown what Columbus really thought he had discovered. You can make your own opinion whether he really was a great admiral, explorer, merchant, and a man who managed to spread the Christian faith, or on the other side, a bloodthirsty killer who murdered a ton of innocent people. I think that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. In his later years, his health situation got even worse, and he was bedbound for several months multiple times. It eventually led to his death in 1506 at the age of 54.